has been brought to my attention that a channel called Dan has made a Bigfoot video. He claims to have totally dismantled the Patterson-Gimlin footage. I figure we should return the favor. Before we get into this, I want to note that Dan is responding to an advocate for this film being a real depiction of Bigfoot. You will find me referencing that person and their arguments alongside Dan from time to time, sometimes referenced as the original video. The first claim Dan makes is that this is the only time Bigfoot has appeared on camera with this level of detail. I am not sure if he is referring to video only or is including photos when he says on camera. Regardless, here are some photos I believe I could defend. This one actually seems to have more detail than Patty. It is categorically false that this is the only time someone has claimed to capture Bigfoot on camera with this level of detail. If you are referring to video only, well, a creature that treats cameras and guns the same is unlikely to stay in frame long. A diversionary display is an exception, as it purposefully puts itself in harm's way, which is the theory I presented in my first video on the topic. This claim relies on there being no evidence, but he could at least quickly go over why the other claims of getting it on camera are not as detailed or something. Even a quick acknowledgement of their existence would be an improvement. And if he thinks there are no other claims, then he couldn't be bothered with a single Google search before making this video. I don't know if intentionally not mentioning it or failing the most basic check is worse, but the part of this claim that is the weakest against the film is that it doesn't even relate to it. He is basically saying, if it's so great, why is it the only one? You are reaching for outside influence instead of having a point on the film itself, while calling the material great, or detailed, as he puts it to make it sound neutral. This doesn't work for your argument as much as you think it does. He uses this fallacious argument to say it is hardly substantial evidence of the creature's existence. The person he's responding to claimed he would prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this film depicts Sasquatch. I know it sounds pedantic, but twisting words is the main way of supporting sophistry. So let me step back and show you the difference between these two arguments. Beyond a reasonable doubt means it logically is more likely to be true. It has to be true, or else your doubts are unreasonable. To prove something is beyond a reasonable doubt, yet to have someone doubt it, means they are illogical. And science isn't supposed to be illogical. But Dan wants to change that narrative. Whether consciously or subconsciously, he wants to focus on things he can twist into being against the evidence. Again, focusing on outside influence. If the film looks legit, throw it into a tsunami of fake videos and call them the same when people can no longer tell the difference. When viewing a tsunami of opposites, you can say it isn't substantial. Substantial is defined as of considerable importance, size, or worth. He is using the second one for his definition. Size. Something beyond a reasonable doubt in this situation is important and has worth, but doesn't have size. If someone forces that metric, it will never be good enough. One film cannot be 20 films. And one film is hardly substantial, isn't it? The next point the person Dan is responding to makes is that when humans walk, we do not do what is called bent knee propulsion. This is easier for these type of primates due to a lower center of gravity. I've already discussed Patty's shorter legs and long arms in proportion to its body in comparison to human. Short legs would result in a lower center of gravity, so this tracks. Dan's point was that bent knee propulsion is used during running. Someone forgot to Google search again. Bent knee propulsion, often called bent hip, bent knee propulsion, in non-human primates is not the same as bending your legs to spring forward for running. Notice how Patty is bending the knee the whole stride rather than springing off. And that's not to mention that Patty is walking, not running. He acknowledges that, and instead of talking about bent knee propulsion for walking and how his running example relates, he talks about clown shoes. He says human wearing clown shoes walk with a flat foot. He says walking in clown shoes is approximately similar to what is shown in the footage, should it be a costume. Now skipping over the comparison, you know what else walks with a flat foot? Animals with a mid-tarsal break. You know, like similar looking non-human primates? Gorillas and chimpanzees, for example? Or do you think the zookeepers put on a costume too? Funnily enough, a mid-tarsal break was shown in the footprint photos taken after the event. Go figure. The next point is the stride length. The original video said it was 41 inches, and Dan says at 6 foot 3 inches tall, he could comfortably stride 41 inches. Well, since we have statistics available to use, let's analyze this anecdote that seems to have been eyeballed. Keep in mind that the stride we're calculating is toe to heel, not 2 steps. At 6 foot 3, the average stride is roughly 31 inches. Dan claims to comfortably add a foot to his stride than the average male his height. Someone 7 feet tall would need to add roughly half a foot to their toe-to-heel stride. Not enough to justify saying they would be able to easily replicate the walking in the video. Maybe fact check instead of using guesswork. If someone had to reach like that, they would not look like they are walking gracefully or casually as shown in the film. Oh, and keep in mind that they put people over 7 feet tall on a list. It's existed since 1955, more than a decade before the film. At the time, being that height wasn't even 1 in a million, it was 1 in 2 to 4 million. And for a human to walk casually, they would need to be approaching or over 8 feet tall. That person didn't even exist in 1967. So aside from the fact that Dan is using a 6 foot 3 inches human as his example, this would be the conspiracy theory he would need to weave for this to work. Patterson and Gimlin got the tallest person alive at the time. They would have had to have instructed him to walk even further than they normally would, but not make it noticeable. Given the footprints, they would also have to ask them to walk in a straight line, as if on a tightrope, and all that on top of the incorrect limb proportions and the bent knee thing we already reviewed, as well as putting a mid-tarsal break into the supposed suit. Yeah, I think that might be beyond a reasonable doubt. He references Corridor Crew's video with the guy Bob Hieronymus, which I already talked about. There's a lot of controversy around this, but I will leave you with the fact that the Polygraph administrator for the TV show, Ed Gelb, faked his credentials. The other polygraph's results are not public, and Bob Hieronymus' lawyers aren't allowing other polygraph experts to check, and the only one to ever see them, Jim McCormick, is now dead. There's been nothing else to substantiate this claim. Dan's only reasoning is,
"That looked pretty bang on to me."
The arms don't swing as much, the legs don't bend the same as mentioned before, Bob Hieronymus is walking with faster strides than Patty, etc, etc. Yeah, I wouldn't call it bang on. The original video talks about visibly flexing calf, glute, back, and thigh muscles. The footage shown in the original video has been compressed, and is somehow a worse resolution than the original footage. So I will show a more original version with less levels of digital compression and stabilization so you can track it easier. When Dan says it isn't clear, it is true in the case of the video he is reviewing's footage. He also says it can be light reflecting differently as it moves. This can really only be shown visually, and with a careful frame-by-frame analysis. The only ones I know to have done something like that is Bill Munn's a costume expert, who concluded it was not a costume, and anthropologist Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who identified muscle groups. I trust experts in their field, rather than Mr. I can step an extra foot with ease. He also goes into the idea that Philip Morris sold the suit to Roger Patterson. Philip Morris tried to prove he made it by doing it again. Noel Dockstader was present and stated it was nothing like the film. Science is about reproducibility, right? Then why couldn't he reproduce it if he did it before? Morris also said it was a standard suit he sold to all their customers. So why has nothing like it ever been seen? This is anything but standard. The prosthetics for the limb proportions alone are ahead of its time and were not made by anyone else. Why didn't Morris make millions in Hollywood using those prosthetics instead? He already sold suits for a living. Well, I will talk about how prosthetics aren't possible given what we see later, but Morris's explanation was sticks in the arms. Well, those are some pretty impressive sticks if they can make the palms clench, the wrist moves, and migrate elbows down south for the winter. Morris likely capitalized on what Bob Hieronymus was doing. He states that the suit he described was the same as the one Bob claimed to have worn, but they aren't the same. Hieronymus says that he was told by his brother that Patterson claimed he manufactured the suit from horsehide, it smelled bad, and weighed 20 to 25 pounds. Morris said it was made of dynol, a lighter weight synthetic material with little or no odor. Hieronymus said the suit had no metal pieces and an upper torso part that he donned like putting on a t-shirt. He said the bottom portion was likely cinched with a drawstring. Morris sold back-zipped onesies. Hieronymus said the suit had hands and feet that were attached to the arms and legs, but Morris made a suit whose hands and feet were separate pieces. And these inconsistencies not only show Morris was lying when he said it was the same suit Bob Hieronymus described, it also shows that they can't both be telling the truth. So which is it, Dan? You vouched for both, so which argument do you have to revisit? I already mentioned the arms, but Dan says there is nothing to suggest the arms were not human arms holding sticks. Well, there are the reasons I listed. Elbows in the center instead of higher up, wrist movements, and the palms clenching in and out. In addition, the swing of the arm wouldn't have the range of motion and smoothness if it were secretly shorter. That cuts out prosthetics along with the sticks. This is the next point of the original video. When this point is mentioned, Dan just straight up ignores it. Ignoring the evidence doesn't make it go away. When the original video mentions that the legs are shorter in proportion to the torso compared to a human, Dan's response is, well, I don't think so. You can measure. I did. The legs are roughly 11% shorter in relation to the body than a human. If you don't think so, it doesn't mean that the fact is just no longer true. The original video said that if you try to put a human in a gorilla suit, which also has shorter legs, it tends to look comical. Dan says you can't compare them because they're a different species. Well, the comparison is what it looks like to have a human wearing a suit with shorter legs. The supposed Bigfoot suit and the gorilla suit both fit that category. I don't see how them being different species changes that comparison. Although I'm not sure Dan knows what is being compared when he makes this statement. Yet another case of choosing to find an unrelated problem instead of engaging with the logic. Also, Dan states this was not a monkey suit, it was a gorilla suit designed to look like a new species. Well, no one said it was a monkey suit. Watch the whole video and check. The original video never said monkey suit. The original video says replication attempts have failed, and Dan retorts by stating they might have failed due to reasons other than the inherent difficulty of recreating it. They might have got the wrong person or made the suit wrong. Well, firstly, that just goes to show how hard it is to create in the first place. And second of all, that's speculation. There is no evidence these issues ever occurred. Like I said earlier, it will never be good enough. Until someone does replicate it, Dan can just say they messed something up in the setup, so it doesn't count. And if it's never replicated, the reason is people keep screwing up other aspects, not because it can't be reproduced. If those aspects are shared as public information, then sure, but they haven't been. In fact, difficulties in the manufacturing process and on-site teams and walking the gate are what have been shared. These are the things that make it difficult to impossible to create in the first place. But of course for Dan, the public facts are weighed less than his own speculation. He says we can't use it as proof of Bigfoot. He is once again reaching outside of the scope of the argument. This is not proof of Bigfoot, nor is that what the original video claimed. It is proof there wasn't a hoax. That's what the original video statement was. Do not conflate yet another argument's thesis. The original video states the face does not look like a rubber mask, and in response, Dan pulls up one from Facebook. Firstly, there's a 59-year gap in technological advancements. What we have machines for now, we didn't have then. But even without that point, the mask doesn't even look like the one in the film. The line between the hair and the face is obvious, while Patty's blends into less and less hair on the eyes and nose. There isn't hair transition on the rubber mask Dan found. It's the same thickness throughout. The mask also lacks a solid sagittal crest. You would need some sort of head strap attachment for that so it doesn't wobble too much, although it would have to be really tight and have a lot of facial coverage to prevent that fully. And that's aside from the obvious differences like the mask having way smaller eyebrows and way more flared nostrils. And the mask, you know, looks like rubber. The original video is talking about how a Bigfoot-like creature would likely be seen as a scary savage animal, which means the actor would portray it as such, and shows an image of King Kong. Dan says King Kong is not Bigfoot.
That's Kong, a giant gorilla, not a Bigfoot.
Firstly, this is just a visual. He did not state King Kong and Bigfoot are the same. This inference comes from either a lack of media comprehension or willful ignorance. Second of all, he's talking about what the average person would view it as. If this creature doesn't exist and they are making it, King Kong is the reference. It was popular and fits very closely with how people view Bigfoot, even today. Like I said before, comparing specific traits does not become invalid once it is of different species. They still share the traits after you point that out. Also, he is talking about public opinion, not the species itself. Public opinion doesn't work in semantics, so when someone sees a big primate, they will portray it as they would any other big primate, since they don't have any other point of reference. Or they would, if that's what happened. But it didn't. Dan's response to the idea itself is stating he thinks they knew this fact that people would think so, which is why they didn't portray it as such. The original video is saying this is the natural portrayal, and Dan is saying they are purposefully being unnatural in their portrayal to trick people. While both are possible, it does require more assumptions to think they went the extra step and only cared about fooling scientists. It is the same logic flat earthers use. They claim the earth is flat, someone talks about the photos. They say they are faked, someone asks about the astronauts who saw the earth. They say the windows are fake, and at some point you just have to ask yourselves how many times do you have to assume they thought ahead instead of accepting facts. At some point, there are too many assumptions holding up this argument, and it begins to fail, especially when there's no evidence there was a Bigfoot hoax or flat earth to begin with. Without that, it's making up evidence to use as confirmation bias. Yeah, it's technically possible, but how far are you willing to stretch for technically possible? Are you willing to think that they thought of what other people thought they would think based on what most people thought? That sentence almost doesn't even make sense. Why would they change the whole scene for such a convoluted idea? So they can trick Sci Guy Dan? But nothing gets past you, huh? Just listen to yourself. Dan's last few points rely on Bob Hieronymus again, so I'll skip past those. Which brings us to the end. Really, this was disappointing for someone claiming to totally dismantle the film. I hope skeptics can do a little better and self-reflect on what their arguments are really saying and how they would sound in a different context. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. Goodbye.